On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don. I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies reduce complexity and increase performance. Today, my guest on the Life Science Success Podcast is Jeff Wessinger. Jeff is the VP of Life Sciences for PointClick Care. We're going to discuss how PointClick Care is providing de-identified data to companies that need to improve care outcomes and expand drug discovery and development. So with that, welcome, Jeff.
Hello, Don. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome. Yeah, so can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jeff Wessinger. I'm somebody that's been in the life sciences industry for my entire career, really a technology enthusiast that's really tried to apply some of the latest capabilities to interesting use cases inside life sciences. I started my career at Bayer Pharmaceuticals and was quickly recruited into the dark side of technology and spent some time at Siebel Oracle. And then ultimately started my own company, which I culminated in a sale a few years back. And now I've, in my sort of semi-retirement years, I'm trying to help PointClick Care in a new business venture to leverage the patient data they have to help life sciences companies like Bayer understand this aging and vulnerable population that's out there. An area that maybe not surprisingly hasn't been the focus of a lot of their research. So that's what I'm doing now. So the PointClick Care Life Sciences group that I run, their mission is to leverage this data and try and connect long-term care with life sciences in a way that it hasn't been done before. So glad to be here to talk about that.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so can you tell me just a little bit more about the market that PointClick Care serves? What do customers look like that come to you?
Yeah, so our core market, so the core capabilities for PointClick Care is we have an EMR that's purpose-built for long-term care, so specifically skilled nursing and retirement home communities. So we have a piece of technology, that helps them, with billing and trust accounting, but primarily with care management, chart management. So, understanding the patient, through that electronic chart and helping the caregivers to care for that patient through technology that's the core business. But as a byproduct of that core business, we've ended up with a ton of longitudinal data about these patients, right? Because they tend to be in the nursing homes or long-term care facility for longer periods of time. We have a very long longitudinal record for these patients. So currently we have about 60% of the U.S. market. So over 60% of the facilities in the U.S., long-term care, skilled nursing facilities, retirement home communities are using this technology, right? So it's a very good base on which to create clinical data sets, for studying diseases that are prevalent in these populations. Think Alzheimer's, dementia, diabetes, congestive heart failure. There are some that are not applicable, but for most therapeutic areas that these companies are studying, we have a database of patients with a very long record and very detailed outcomes that will allow them to study in a way that they haven't been able to before.
Very interesting. And so any idea in terms of the amount of patients, or in terms of numbers, what sort of counts or populations are we talking about here?
So there's currently active residents in these homes is about 1.5 million. So at any given time, we have 1.5 million people that are in the system being cared for. But over the last, we provide about 5 years of longitudinal data. And so that data set that we provide includes over 10 million unique patients that we can provide for research.
Oh, wow. That would be interesting. And the one thing that I did read as well about PointClick Care is that you provide insights for high risk populations and that you support research by expanding drug discovery and development. So,
Right.
is it mostly these patients that are in these long-term care facilities that you're focusing in on, or are there others?
Yeah, for now we have. So you may have read that we did we did a couple of acquisitions in the last 2 years. A company called Collective Medical and another company called Audacious Inquiry. And they're more on the acute side of the house. So what they do is they provide an alert mechanism for patients when they hit the emergency room. So when they're admitted to the hospital, there's an alert that goes out and identifies, primarily payers, providers that this patient has showed up. So
Mm,
frequent users of the healthcare system are also considered vulnerable, and so this type of identification and alerting mechanism can help you to serve those patients better. Right? Unfortunately, that record is very episodic and maybe not as good for research. There might be some value in terms of, if pharma wanted to run a clinic, stroke patients, maybe being able to alert them that there's now a stroke happening at any given time so that they could potentially involve them in the clinical trial or get them the life-saving therapy could be a possibility. But for the most part, when we're talking about the data that we provide, it's coming from the EMR system that we have in nursing and retirement homes.
interesting. And so, I mean, you mentioned Bayer originally. Are you seeing sort of other drug provider or drug companies, pharmaceutical companies come to you, looking for these data sets as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was almost immediate. As soon as we made this data available, we had a lot of interest. I think disproportionate level of interest in things like neurology, so Alzheimer's, dementia, other neurologic conditions. An interesting one that we had was in age-related anorexia or geriatric anorexia. And the reason that pharma companies are gravitating to this data versus what they've traditionally used in claims data is that the claims data doesn't give you the outcomes. The
Mm,
EHR data gives you the outcome. So, for example, in our system, you're measuring daily weights and vitals for these patients. So every day you get weights and vitals. So if you're looking to study, or trying to figure out what part of the population may be suffering from age-related anorexia, and the inclusion criteria is rapidly declining BMI over 6, 9, or 12 months, you would need that outcome information. You would need to have their weights, and you need to measure that trend, right? So that type of outcome is an example of what the EHR can provide. And there's many reasons that this hasn't been used in the past. I mean, the biggest one is we haven't made this data available. But there's also a misconception in the market that this data may not be high quality. There may be gaps in it, and that it's not that useful for research, which is completely false. I mean, PointClick Care, as is exemplified by the name, a lot of the data entry is done by pointing, clicking, drop down boxes. There really isn't any free text. The free text gets filled out by the drop down boxes, so the data is very high quality. And in the U.S. market, it's a lot of it is required for reimbursement. So you've got a significant data set here, and we have
mm.
over 30 terabytes of patient data in that 10 million patient population.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, this harkens a lot of thoughts in my mind in terms of different things, and so I'm going to sort of branch off and maybe we just in general discuss a couple of things. So,
Yeah,
so my mom is 90, and and she lives with me, so we care for her on a daily basis, and she's constantly changing her own diet. So I can only imagine what what it'd be like for her. Can you see dietary information as well?
absolutely. Right. So, in this specific case, we looked at that too. So, whether their appetite was suppressed. I mean, did they eat a full meal, a half meal? This information is captured in the system as well, right? So, not only do you see that, the ultimate outcome, which is their weight is declining, you also see that they've had that loss of appetite, which, in this case, the pharma company believes is a neurologic condition, right? In fact, without disclosing the name, they believe if they can solve this problem, right, geriatric anorexia, they may unlock the key for obesity, which
Mm,
is even which is an even bigger market. But the fact is, that if when we looked at the data, 1% of the population were properly diagnosed with this condition. So the ICD was there. And in fact, if you look at the inclusion criteria that was developed, it may well be that 20 to 25% of the population suffer from this. So this is the kind of things and insights we can bring out of the data because we have those very detailed outcomes.
Wow. I mean, it's really interesting. What about for, the unfortunate events of, deceased patients? Can you also retain and provide information on them?
We can, so obviously we are providing an anonymized data set. And one of the big risks to, being in this business is having, privacy be breached. And we are very, very careful about that. So mortality information at the patient record is normally an easily identifiable service date, right? So you can't normally provide it. What you can do is provide it in aggregate, right? So we use something called safe harbor. And sorry, we don't use safe harbor. We use expert determination to determine the re-identification risk. So we can provide mortality in certain cases where we strip out other identifying information. So it's possible. And with COVID, we provided this data to the CDC. And, because they're a government organization, they're allowed to get the mortality information. No one else is, but government entities can do that. And specifically because of COVID, they were able to. But in a general sense, mortality information at the longitudinal record is not something we provide.
Okay. And then I would imagine for large pharma companies too. So, I mean, the large pharma companies that I've interacted with, they have privacy officers and they make you go through extensive privacy assessments and things like that. And you guys have had to do that as well?
Yeah, we work with a third-party company, which was Mirador and now is Datavant. So they do the third-party expert determination for us. And believe me, pharma does not want identifiable data, right? So they go out of their way to make sure that we do that. But yeah, we definitely adhere to best practices in sharing this data.
And then in terms of sort of, making sure that the I guess the more or less the population data and things like that minimizes data silos. Are you able to do that as well?
Yeah, well, that's that's another interesting part of it is that technology exists today to merge these data sets. So we provide part of the picture. So we have the patient from the time they hit the institution, to when they're discharged, which could be back home, could be the hospital, or as you said, they may have passed on. But that's not the whole picture with respect to the patient. So there's obviously claims and, acute data, ambulatory data that existed before they got in. Some of that we will get on admission diagnosis or admission medications, but that history, in terms of the procedures and other things that happen, we don't have. But what exists now is a way to take the PHI information for that patient that we have and create a token, a unique token for that patient with other data sources like claims or like social determinants of health data sources. We can actually now connect other pieces of information, about this patient's healthcare journey, put it all together in an anonymized record, and now we see the whole picture. So instead of having, just the hospital data or just, the clinic data, right, or just the insurance claims, now we can put it all together and we can really see, how this patient got to that point, right? And so, and one of the key missing pieces was our data because we've only recently started doing this. So once they hit the nursing home, a lot of information was now missing. And we can now combine that with other data sources. And as you said, break down those silos. And that token technology is what allows us to do it.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, again, to go back to my parents, just in general, my dad was, because my PhD was in information technology, I was sort of, forging a path down this EMR, pathway, but just, telling them that, look, you've got to maintain your own personal care record, because as you go from place to place, people can't tie the two things together anymore. Unfortunately, but I mean, it's great to hear that there is a way today to do that. Unlike whenever I was doing a lot of my studies a while back. So yeah, good to hear. The other question I had was, also PCC's data, helped the CDC better understand COVID-19. How did that come about?
Well, we so what we did early on when we were, I think the world knew us as an EHR company, but they had no idea that we had this tremendous data asset. And then, right around the time we were trying to figure out how we would get this data into the hands of people that could, do some good with it, COVID hit. So that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we thought, what better way than to just give this data away to those who can use it? And the CDC was a company that jumped on that offer immediately. So they started to use it to understand, and surveil long-term care institutions with our data, right? And which was great. I mean, and they were able to do a lot of research, understand through the outcomes I talked about, who was the most vulnerable inside of these homes, who's most susceptible, what happened beyond just the diagnosis. ADL scores, for example, were being examined to figure out what the impact on their quality of life was, that kind of thing. And then ultimately mortality, as I said, was something that they could also study, which was important. But in a word, it was outcomes. And, the CDC continues to use the data to this day beyond COVID-19 for more population health initiatives. And we are happy to give it to them. I mean, they are an organization that really can, through policy, do a lot of good with this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I would imagine just the government, tie just in general would help to feed other research that could potentially be, developed out of this. Cause I mean, typically you wind up with data and then you just wind up with more questions, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, the other sort of, thing I would throw at you as well is, are you seeing people take the data and tag it as well? I'm seeing things like, Elation has this data catalog where you can sort of, provide, tags to all of your data, which then sort of, again, could feed, research and lead to other discoveries.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of tagging is something that exists in the when we productize the data and when we provide a data model for it. I mean, the biggest problem with, as you say, providing just the data is really understanding sort of the shape of it. What's the quality of it? How much of it do you have? How much of it is missing data. So that's all described in the offer that we have. So we try to add as much value as we can beyond cleansing the data and anonymizing it. We try to describe it in the best way possible and use standards that are available today. Like ICD codes, for example.
Sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely, having, procedure codes or even treatment codes as well as disease codes would all, I would imagine, help in the end as well.
Yeah. Loin codes for, testing and lab tests. There's a ton of standards that are in use. SNOMED's becoming more popular as sort of a more descriptive record about the patient. So yeah, I mean, we try and add as much value as we can inside the data set in describing it, tags being one way, and also through the services that we provide around the data.
Okay. And then how is your data used as a critical resource in terms of like a drug utilization review? That was something else I picked up on as well that it's used for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good use cases there. I think one of the main ones that we have been involved directly in is the antipsychotic use. So if you think about, alternative therapies to that, I mean, I know it's gotten a lot of press, but, being able to use the data to understand where there's, overuse situations and try and, change the therapies and in some cases, even the diagnosis for these patients. Because once a patient's on a powerful antipsychotic, they become the highest cost of care patient at the institution, right? I mean, they're effectively asleep. Everything has to be done for them. So if there are alternatives, to prescribing this type of therapy, then we want to understand those better and help companies that have alternative therapies promote their stuff, promote the overuse of antipsychotics and some of the alternatives that are available, right? So I think, it is a critical resource to understand, how these situations are happening. And it does vary across geographies and across institutions. So understanding why that's happening and be able to impact change, I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And just being able to, I guess in the end, sort of provide that total picture to people that are creating things in the future as well. I mean, if you're creating a next generation drug and also understanding, what are the other drugs that these patients are on would also be helpful in the process, I would imagine.
No, no, absolutely. Right. I mean, I think that was one case, but there are many cases where, there are older protocols that are in use, right, that should be discontinued, right?
Yeah.
And in many cases, I mean, one of the bigger problems we've seen is just an underdiagnosis, right? That, well, we have a lot of assessments that are being done, right? Like an ADL, which is activities for daily living. Like we can tell, their ability to ambulate, feed themselves, toilet themselves, that kind of thing. And we can see that they're progressing along a path that leads to a diagnosis that may not be happening. Let's face it, the caregivers in these institutions, physicians may not be able to spend as much time as they normally would, and may miss it, right? So being able to look across the vastness of assessment information that we have, we may be able to assess, a mild cognitive impairment earlier, and get an alert out there, or at least see that there are vast populations that we could help with by educating and understanding.
And then the types of companies, the types of drug companies that would come to you, what do they normally look at, or how do they normally wind up, initially coming to PCC?
Yeah, usually it's because they have a research project. They have a project that they're looking at, right? Like the Pfizer one. They wanted to be able to measure an outcome, which was BMI, to try and estimate what the population that suffered from this potential disease was. Or we would have other companies that would look at, the number of, they'd have a drug that's in market and they'd want to use the data to test whether there is a label extension that's possible. So they have a product that's already indicated for Parkinson's-based psychosis, and they want to extend the label to dementia-based psychosis. They would use our data to determine if it's being prescribed off-label and what the ultimate impact or outcome was there. So examples like that. They may also want to use it for commercial reasons to figure out switching reason. If someone was switched off their therapy or switched to their therapy, why was that, right? They can see that they switched, but the EHR data will allow them to dig deeper and figure out why that may have occurred. So there are many, many use cases, some commercial, many clinical. And really it all starts with that first question, right? It's usually around how many, or, what can we do here?
Okay. Yeah, that really helps, at least for me, in terms of, where the fit in the market is, and how people would find you, and things like that. Hey, before we move on, I mean, we'll cover a little bit of the links and things like that for your company and how to get in touch in just a moment. But
Sure.
there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. Jeff, what inspires you?
Yeah, so I mean, technology, specifically futuristic technology. So I've been inspired since a young age to, to work with technology, watching, futuristic programs like a Star Trek or Star Wars. I was always interested in, you know, working and trying to, you know, bring these technologies into existence if they weren't there. So I'm inspired by companies that actually make that difference. Companies like Tesla that, have made an autonomous car, Google for organizing the internet, or in our space like Flatiron for potentially being a small part or playing a small part in finding cures for cancer. Right? If we can play a small part in finding a cure for Alzheimer's or dementia, right, by providing data that may not have been available, that's inspiring to me, right? That's where I think, I'd like this to end up, and I think we've done some of that now. Have we cured Alzheimer's? No. Have we gotten people thinking about diseases like age-related anorexia? Sure. Have we done a little bit in dementia? Yeah. We're not going to solve these problems on our own, but we're going to help the companies that do that.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, these things are not going to come as a part of a bold move anyway, right? I mean, cancer's been around for a long time and mutates all the time, and dementia and as well as Alzheimer's, we just don't understand an awful lot about it. It seems like still, and so there are going to be small things that we're going to chip away at over time through different technologies and stuff, and so I can understand why you're saying that inspires you, that being a part of it, one, but then also being in the right place at the right time with the technology, definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
And then what concerns you?
Well, I think we touched a little bit on it. I think the population of people that we serve, the aging and vulnerable population is, more or less been ignored, at least in the clinical or research setting, and really in the clinical trial setting. I'm not sure they're the only group that's being ignored, and studies continue to be focused on 20 to 60-year-old white males, which is good for me, but not necessarily good for everyone, right? So I'd love to see the trial process and research process be more democratized. Like the interesting thing for me is when we started working with the data, even real world evidence studies, which don't require patients to go through a double blind placebo-based study, even the ones that are only using data, still had exclusion criteria that eliminated patients that were institutionalized in a nursing home and didn't look at any other data. So they could effectively be there for other reasons, right? Not have a ton of comorbidities or medications. They could still be very lucid, no cognitive impairment, but they were excluded only because they were there. So I think, if we can start to chip away at those misconceptions, and I think it'll happen partly through legislation, partly through opportunity for these companies. But if we can be part of the education process to educate and move them, then maybe that won't be a concern. But today it still is a concern, right? I mean, the other thing is EHR data in general is not common practice. It's not used a ton in research projects. So, that's a concern for me. I think a lot of the misconceptions driving that should be corrected. So those are the two things that concern me directly in the space that I'm in.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, maybe somebody that picks up on something that we talk about, here, or something else that PCC is doing, helps, people kind of broaden their minds at least a little bit more in terms of, what that could be as well. My parents, as I said, are older, and I for sure am seeing it live, right? I mean, I see this, on a daily basis in terms of, my mom's care, and just the ongoing sort of interactions that she has with caregivers as well. So I definitely am seeing it there. Last question: what excites you?
Well, I think it's really along the lines of everything we've talked about, having the opportunity, right, and bringing this organization into a place where we have an opportunity to help be a part of these cures, right? Your parents and mine. I mean, they're going through things that ultimately we're going to go through too, and some of these diseases are terrible. Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, I can't even imagine having parents go through that, let alone myself. And definitely, I don't want my kids to have a possibility of suffering through these things. I think we have a real opportunity to cure some of them, before my kids reach that age, if not when I get there. So I'm excited to be a part of that, right? Not to be the genesis of it completely, but to be a small part of it. That excites me, and that gets me up every day.
Yeah, definitely a great answer for that one. So where can people learn more about PCC and you, and how do they get in touch?
Yeah, so they can get in touch through our website. So www.pointclickcare1word.com. That's there's call to actions in there. You can send us an email through that. You could also go to my LinkedIn profile, which I think will be provided through this if you're watching it. So yeah, I mean, you could reach out to me directly if all else fails. But yes, our website is probably the best resource.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me today on the Life Science Success Podcast. It was great to have you as a guest and to hear more about what PointClick Care is doing in the space. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.